just a hack. He's just an absolute hack. And he gets his ass kicked by his teammates every week. It's just, it's terrible. It's just terrible.
Welcome back to another episode of the Believe in NFL Draft Prospects podcast. I'm Joe DeLeone here with Ryan Roberts. Week 2 is behind us. We're on to week 3. College football, the ever-turning wheel is already going. And Ryan, this is a weird week too. This is a week where, and I texted this to you when we were trying to figure out which guys we wanted to talk about. It felt like it was a lot of teams that made headlines, less big name players that had noteworthy performances. But the result that we have after this week, we do have a lot of really good pass catchers that had good under the radar games. Overall, though, Ryan, I'm safe to admit here, and anyone who is following the channel knows, this is probably one of my least favorite weeks of college football because of the nonsense that happened in a lot of these games, and the unpredictable nature of it was not very good for my betting. It was not very good for my psyche and a lot of other things.
Well, I was going to ask how your betting went this week. I guess it wasn't too great.
Well, yeah. I was 3 for 2, and I'm like, I'm a good college football bettor. So like 3 for 2 for me is a bad week, but I still was over even. You know, I still went over breaking even, but I bet on NFL games, and that was a mistake.
Yeah, especially the first week NFL action, man. It's always a weird week too. But college football was bizarre, man. I mean, Marshall upsets Notre Dame, Appalachian State upsets Texas A&M, Texas almost beats Alabama without Quinn Ewers for the second half of that football game. Like, it was just a strange week of college football. Scott Frost got canned. Finally, we knew that was coming, but finally it was going to happen. So it was a strange week of college football. Very strange, to say the least.
And I also I think that Texas game against Alabama is like the firmest example of my point that it was less about players, more about teams. Like that Texas 1-point loss was a team performance. That was not a it's not like one guy took over the game and they popped off. Bijan had, I think, like 2.7 yards per carry. Like, he was barely used in that game. Xavier Worthy had a pretty good game. Quinn Ewers goes out. Hudson Card barely does anything when he steps in, but it was because they played so well collectively as a whole. And that's kind of what we got. All these really good team performances, not so much guys that were contributing with massive performances, kind of like what we had in week 1 with Anthony Richardson, who had a really good game.
I know we're not talking about, like, Joe, I don't know if you watched much of the Alabama game, but man,
I watched all of it. I had a bet on the line.
Bryce Young does not have much help on that team right now, man. I mean, outside of Jamir Gibbs, like I should say the wide receivers are not much of a help, and the offensive line's not very good either, man. Like he's gonna have to make some chicken salad out of chicken, you know what, this year for Alabama, unfortunately, which might be good for him actually, because I thought he actually had a pretty good game. I mean, Dane Brugler just posted a clip of him breaking out to the right and throwing an absolute dime on the run where the wide receiver just drops an easy ball. And I'm just like, that's Bryce is making plays, but it's not. This might be the worst wide receiver group that Alabama's had since Julio. Like, I mean, since like as a collective, not shaded Julio. Julio was a great player in college. I'm saying since as a collective of wide receivers, it's probably been about 10 plus years since they've had a wide receiver unit this bad.
Yeah, Jamir Gibbs was the best receiving option that Bryce had in this game, and that's that's a stock up for Jamir Gibbs, because it's showing, hey, this is a multi-dimensional guy. This is a guy that can impact the game when he can't get those rushing yards. He can catch the ball and make plays through the air. Latu didn't do anything, and that group of receivers, man, that is I know there's 5 stars in there, but it's a group of nobodies. Nobody did anything in that game. That was all Bryce that kept them in that game.
Yeah, and if you don't follow Dane Brugler, one, you should, but go check out DP Brugler. He just posted again 22 minutes ago an incredible third down play where he breaks out of the pocket, cuts back, gets the grain, and delivers an absolute shot across the middle of the field, and just a drop, man. And Alabama, this Joe, have you seen Georgia looked really good the first game?
Yeah.
But have you seen it? And I think they won like 33-0 yesterday against Samford. I mean, it's Samford, so like whatever. There's not many great teams at the top right now, man. Like, there's not. I mean,
I pushed back a little bit on that. I think.
Do you? Why?
I think Georgia. Oh, you're saying?
I said besides Georgia.
Okay.
Georgia,
Sorry,
I have not seen a team.
Yes.
Because I think, I don't know, Alabama, I thought has some chinks in the armor
There's
right now.
holes. Yeah. Ohio State has holes.
Right. It seemed like Ohio State got a good victory in week 1, but then Notre Dame just loses to Marshall. So, like, how good of a win was that?
Right.
If we're being completely honest, and it's Clemson, I didn't think looked great. I mean, they ended up winning 41-10 against Georgia Tech in week 1, but
they only won like 35-14 against Furman. Like,
yes. Yeah. So I don't know, man. There's a lot of uncertainty up top. I mean, Michigan, I think, is a decent team, but like they haven't played anybody yet either. I mean, we just have to see.
I was gonna say with Michigan, and I hate to admit this, they haven't played anybody. But when JJ McCarthy's in, that offense looks freaking good, dude. Like I got to see what happens when they're tested. And I think maybe their first test is Iowa, even though there's not going to be much of a defensive battle for them to face off against Petrus. But
speaking of a defensive battle, Iowa beat Iowa State. What was it, 10-7 or something like that?
That was one of my bet wins.
Oh my god, it was so ugly, man. But yeah, no, I just struggling with this year a bit so far, man. Like, I mean, like you say, like, oh, JJ McCarthy, and I agree. I think, I put on Twitter, like when they announced that it was like a battle week 1, week 2 to week 3 or whatever. I'm just like, if it is a tie, go with a more talented younger player. Like that's
I don't even
so
think it's
basic,
a tie though.
Man. It's not, Joe. But would you be surprised if week 3, if Cade McNamara is still the starter? Would you be surprised?
No, because Harbaugh's a bozo and he does stupid stuff like that. Well, and I even made that point that like if by making that decision in week 1, you're already setting your team back, and hopefully they make the right decision and they pick JJ McCarthy. But let's get back on track. We've got like 4 guys that we want to cover that we thought had really good performances and put the microscope on them after this week. None of them are actually, one of them is a quarterback. I stand corrected. Before we get to that though, folks, I just want to tell you about Bet Online. Bet Online is the fastest and easiest way to wager on all your favorite sports contests and events with first to market odds and lines with reviews and news for every league, including Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, and even golf. BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for all of your sports information, from live in-game betting, props, and futures. Head to BetOnline today or use your mobile device to join and make your first sports bet. Use our promo code BELIEVE50 to receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, Ryan. So first guy that I want to discuss here, A.T. Perry, Wake Forest in general had a really good game, and I know that they're playing Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt is better than I think people are willing to give them credit, but Wake Forest proved that they are dominant and they are possibly one of the top 2 teams in the ACC this year, which feels weird to say. They got back Sam Hartman after the medical condition, and A.T. Perry right back in rhythm with Hartman with the game that he had. He went over 100 yards receiving, had a lot of big chunk plays. And again, I understand it's against a relatively weak Vanderbilt defense, but A.T. Perry continues to remind us that this is going to be quite possibly a top 50 pick by the end of the year.
Dude, I love A.T. Perry. I love him. I think that I guess first and foremost, I guess the good news is that Sam Hartman's back healthy. That's great, right? I mean, he's a tremendous college quarterback, and it was great to see. I actually picked.
They will be a Senior Bowler.
Yes, he will probably 100% be a Senior Bowler. Joe, I picked Vanderbilt in the upset this week, just not betting on it, but like just picking it because I thought that Vanderbilt maybe would just kind of upset them and all. But yeah, it didn't turn out too great on that end. But that regardless, good to see Sam Hartman back. Very good college quarterback. Not much else in my opinion. But A.T. Perry's a stud, man. I mean, the kid's 6'4", runs routes like a much smaller man, has good speed. Everything's there. And I mean, you see explosive plays are just created because he can create separation with his length, with his foot quickness, and speed too. I think that he's a faster player than people are giving him credit for. So A.T. Perry, top 50 pick. Absolutely. I'm there with it, man. I am 100% there because I just think that there's just such a clean projection for an A.T. Perry. And you saw it this week, man. He can create explosive plays, but he also does the little stuff, like the chops as a route runner, getting in and out of breaks, instant separation. Like he does a lot of stuff where I could project him in the boundary, to the field, as a slot receiver, as a bigger slot. Like I can project him in all those things. So I think I really like the diversity of an A.T. Perry, and it continues to make big plays for Wake Forest in the last couple of years.
I'm not saying this is a 1-to-1 comparison, but it gives me vibes of Drake London last year, who was just really consistent, a guy who did all the, the nitty-gritty things. And I think AT Perry is
I
a
like
better
ATP. That's a good
AT.
nickname. I like it.
Yeah, it's not bad.
ATP.
Yeah.
ATP.
Because ATP means energy. Don't quote me on that if anyone actually, knows science. You know what I mean. No, you know what ATP. Wait, do you know what ATP is?
I've never heard of ATP, so no, I'm learning right
now. ATP is a molecule in your muscles that is I don't know the exact extent of it. It's a molecule in your muscles that is used for producing energy. I don't want to go in the full breakdown because I don't fully understand it. But I know that I do know that it's important for muscle recovery and production, and that's why people take creatine, is because it increases that production of ATP. But
interesting,
weirdest sidetrack we've ever had on the show.
Yes,
it gives me vibes of Drake London because he's just so consistent. He has a bunch of really good games strung together. London goes down with the injury at the end of last year, but he's a guy who just did everything right throughout the season. Big body guy, can play in the slot, can play on the outside, and then he ends up being the first receiver taken. I don't know if A.T. Perry ends up being that first receiver, but he gives me those vibes of, again, the consistency, the size, the route running, all those things. He checks a lot of boxes across the board as a prospect.
Yeah, he does, man. I again, my favorite part about his game is that his route running. It takes you so off guard, Joe, because like you wouldn't think that a guy 6'4", 210 pounds would be that type of route runner, and he could have a big impact. I mean, and let's be honest about this, right? Jackson Smith-Njigba is a good football player, not a dynamic athlete, and he's out for a couple games now dealing with the injury. You talking about Keyshawn Boutte, who is just a part of a pretty stagnant passing offense with LSU, right? Jordan Addison's doing a good job. I'm surprised you didn't bring up Jordan Addison today, man. He had a phenomenal game.
I was debating it, but I knew you would get upset, so I didn't want to do that to you.
I would not get upset. But anyway, but the point of what I was trying to say is that I do think it's a pretty wide open wide receiver group. I do. I don't think that there's one guy. I'm a Keyshawn Boutte fan. Like, that's my wide receiver one leaving the summer, but I don't think that AT is going to have the trajectory to being the first wide receiver taken, but he could absolutely crash the top 5. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind on that, because he is a really gifted player and he's playing good football, right? And we've seen a couple guys that just have not gotten off to the best of starts. I mean, we didn't even talk about Quentin Johnston, who in the first 2 weeks for TCU has like 40-something yards combined receiving in 2 games or something like that, right? So, like, yeah, A.T. Perry could be that guy. We'll see, but he's obviously coming off of a very strong game. He just has to continue that momentum.
So diving into some guys that we didn't really take the time to cover during the summer, the first being Dalton Kincaid, who for Utah was a transplant from the University of San Diego. He goes over 100 yards against Southern Utah. We didn't cover him when we did the tight end rankings, and I think a lot of people have him as like a tight end 6 or 7 in what is going to be a pretty good tight end class. What are your thoughts on Kincaid? Because I admittedly have not really dove in as much into him as I know you have.
He's an interesting player because, like you said, I mean, he comes from, he was an All-American pick at San Diego FCS school. It's a part of the Pioneer League, right? It's the one that has Pioneer League is the non-scholarship
and the horrible geographic section. One that's all over the place.
Yeah, man. Yeah. Oh my God. I know I don't think University of Jacksonville is a part of it anymore.
They don't have a football program anymore.
They don't have a football program anymore, right?
Yeah.
So, but at one point, it's like Dayton is in Ohio, San Diego, California. You had Jacksonville in Florida. It's like
Davidson
literally touching
in North Carolina.
Yeah, it's like touching like all corners of the U.S. It was weird, and it's a non-scholarship.
Go figure.
As well, which makes no sense. But anyway, yeah. So he was an All-American at San Diego. Long kid, 6'6", 240-something pounds at that time. He's up near around 250 pounds now. And Joe, when he was at San Diego, he was basically a flex tight end. Like, that's what he was. He was used as a pass catcher. The thing that I like about Dalton Kincaid is I think that he's a really smooth player. And he's got a massive frame to be a nice receiver in the passing game. But the thing that is interesting, Joe, is coming from his background as a San Diego player, wasn't asked to block a ton. He's actually developed into a pretty good blocker for Utah.
He's got the size for it.
I mean, it's not imposing, but like it's passable as an NFL blocker, as a tight end. So he can play in line a little bit. He can absolutely play in the slot. He can be an H. He can move all over the place. So I wouldn't call him like a dynamic player by any stretch, but I think that he's just a really smooth, good football player. And I think he's going to play a lot of football in the next level. He is, I think, a better version of Jake Ferguson that came out of Wisconsin last year, right? Like Jake was a solid football player. I just didn't think he was a great athlete. I think Dalton Kincaid's a better athlete than Jake.
Yeah.
So I would not be surprised if Dalton Kincaid's just a really good tight end 2 on the next level. Or, if he develops, maybe he becomes a low end tight end 1, but we'll see. Either way, really nice week going over 100 yards. Not against the greatest of competition, but I think you saw in this game that there's more to him than just block and short to intermediate pass catcher. Like he can stretch the seam a little bit. So I like Dalton Kincaid. I think he's a really underrated player in the 2023 tight end group. And he'll definitely be in Mobile. Definitely.
Oh, 100%. He's a much older player too because of the the COVID eligibility and the FCS to FBS transfer. This episode ends up being a big body pass catcher show for some reason.
Yeah.
Because the other player, this is kind of a pairing.
Hey, Dalton Kincaid's only 22. You lied.
Oh, is he really? I thought he was older. Well, in terms of eligibility, he's like a redshirt junior or something like that.
He's actually a 5th-year senior, but
I knew he was like one of those like super eligibility guys.
Yeah, so you were right about the eligibility side of things, but according to our database, he's not turned 23 until October. So
I refuse to acknowledge a player as young if they are a 5th-year senior. You are old in my eyes.
That's fair. A lot of experience. Oh, this is a crazy stat. 33 and 5/8 inch arms. He's got long arms, man, and 10 and 1/8 inch hands.
He's a big freaking dude. He's gonna be somebody that everybody geeks over at the combine. I feel like everyone's gonna have a crush on him.
He'll probably run pretty well too. Yeah. So makes sense. Yeah.
But today ends up being the big body pass catcher show because another guy who had a super crazy performance was Cedric Tillman, who had 9 receptions for 162 yards and a touchdown. I'm adding into the mix Hendon Hooker because if you watch this game, and I know that you were at the Notre Dame Marshall game, Hendon had to do a lot to keep them like up and moving because they could not run the ball and they could not move the ball on the ground. Credit to Pitt's run defense led by Kalijah Cansey and that whole front 7 looked really, really good in this game. Hendon had to throw 42 passes. He had to throw the ball a ton, and he was running all over the place. He was making a lot of tough throws. It helps when Cedric Tillman pops off the way that he did. And again, Tillman's another guy that we didn't talk about during summer scouting, but he's got some traits. He's got some juice to him. I got to ask you before I let you dissect Tillman, what's the relation between him and Charles Tillman?
Is there a relationship? I'm not 100% sure about it.
There's gotta be. Why does
there have to be? Tillman's not like that crazy of a last. Like it's not a unique last name, is it?
But didn't Charles Tillman also play Tennessee? No,
he did not.
His dad. So Cedric Tillman has a dad who played at Alcorn, and he played for the Broncos. All right, go ahead. I'm going to look this up.
Yeah, you look that up. Cedric Tillman, Joe, I think, is going to fight with A.T. Perry as the top-ranked senior wide receiver in this class. Massive kid, 6'3", 215, 34.5-inch arms, which is silly. Has 9 and 7/8-inch hands, 22 years old, estimated around a 4.5 flat in the 4-yard dash. He reminds me a lot of Cortland Sutton that plays with the Denver Broncos. Pretty good linear guy, more of a vertical based oriented type of receiver, but he can win at the catch point. He can run a little better than you might anticipate. And he's got a massive, massive catch radius. He's a Bishop Gorman guy, I think, originally. So he was on that Bishop Gorman team that had Dorian Thompson-Robinson and Jalen Naylor and all those guys, right? So he comes from a really nice program. Vertically oriented player, can push the ball down the field, 50-50 balls or more like 80-20 balls with him. So he's a really good player, man. And I think he's sort of similar to AT. I think AT's a much better route runner than Cedric Tillman, but
I think he's further along too.
Yeah, but from a height, weight, speed perspective, Cedric Tillman can play, man. Like he might be a We have an estimated 4.5 flat. He might be a 4.4 or something type of athlete at 6'3", 215 pounds with 34+ inch arms. So he's a good football player, man. Senior Bowler will absolutely be there, guaranteed. And he could be the top senior off the board at the wide receiver position. Like, it's very possible. So Cedric Tillman's a good football player, very good player.
ESPN needs to update their class information because it says he's a junior, which is not correct.
He's a 5th-year senior.
Yeah, I know. That's horrible that they don't have that.
Well, I guess, could he be a COVID kid? Wait, no. Yeah, so maybe he's a COVID kid. I don't know. But anyway.
I trust the information that whatever is on the website or whatever you have.
He's that regardless of if he's classified as a junior or senior, he's definitely a 5th-year player. We'll leave it at that. Yeah.
But definitely very fun, big body player. The traits that he brings to the table. Any thoughts on Hendon Hooker, who I know that we have talked up to every full extent. This is a weird class to figure out the next quarterback, and I still think that the battle is between Levis and Richardson for that 3 spot. But Hendon still kind of hovers on the outside and maybe being like that mid to late day 2 quarterback that's picked.
I think we talked about it in the summer a little bit, but I mean, I was surprised at how high I was on Hendon Hooker's film last year. Like, I liked a lot of the flashes of Virginia Tech. That was the weirdest thing in Virginia Tech, Joe. I felt like every time they played Hendon Hooker, they were competitive or they did pretty well. But for whatever reason, they were just like, we're going to run a middle school offense, so we're not going to give Hendon Hookers the keys to the car all the time. And I think that was very misused in that sense. But he's a really talented kid. I mean, he's 6'3" plus. He's 221 pounds. He's got big hands. The big thing about Hendon Hooker, though, is that he's a little bit older. He's already 25 years old. So he's a 6-year senior. So he's going to come into the NFL with the age question marks around him, but very talented. I mean, he's a big, strong-armed, athletic kid who is actually pretty accurate. Like, it's not bad. His whole thing is that, like, he's just a little inexperienced still, right? Like, he hasn't played a ton of football that you would expect for a 6-year senior. So I'm excited to see how he continues to develop this year because I think there are a lot of tools. It's just some people are going to say, but like, what's the trajectory for him being a starting quarterback? By the time he hits his second contract, he's going to be right around 30 years old. Like, there's going to be some question marks in that area, but I think Hendon Hooker has just about as good as tools as anybody in this class. I mean, I think you could say Anthony Richardson probably has the best tools potentially of any player, any quarterback in the 2023 class. I think you can say Will Levis is probably in that ballpark as well. But Hendon Hooker's right there, I think, with Will Levis, man. Like, he has similar tools as far as Levis does. So I like him, man. I think he's a nice developmental option at the next level. I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up being a day 2 player.
And at the very least, I think some teams look at him and say, developmental upside, maybe the age bumps him into just being a backup for the long term. But heck, having a good backup quarterback, as we see, feels like every single year with the Dallas Cowboys, is important to have. Because if you have that guy, then they can step in and then you don't really lose a step or too many steps when you're trying to recover.
But I will say this about it. It's going to be a murky thing because 25 is an old rookie. Like, that's old, right? But I mean, Kenny Pickett just went 20th overall in the draft, and he was 24. So, like, it's not like a far, it's not like a far cry from 24 to 25. But yeah, it's going to be a major talking point. It's just, I wish that Hendon Hooker was developed properly during his college career. Like, I think that this is the fault of Virginia Tech. It really is, man. Justin Fuente did not. I don't understand. And all due respect to Quincy Patterson and Braxton Burmeister, like, I'm not throwing shade at those guys. I'm really not. But how did you look at those 3 together and say Hendon Hooker's not clearly the guy? Like, I don't get that. Quincy Patterson went to North Dakota State and he was a backup quarterback, right? Like, he started like a couple games and he just a backup quarterback. Braxton Burmeister's like a starter now at like San Diego State or something like that. How do they not look at Hendon Hooker and say that's our guy? It just was very mismanaged at the quarterback position at the college. It was ugly, man. Ugly.
So throwing a little bit of a spotlight to one more guy, Israel Abakinda, the Pitt running back.
Your boy, man.
No,
claim him, Joe.
I'm not. So this is just like, hey, this guy had a really good game, and maybe he deserves to get looked at. He's not. I'm not saying this is like a top 5 running back. That's not what I'm saying. But he finishes the game for 25 carries, 154 yards, and a touchdown. But the big thing you have the 76-yard rushing touchdown in the beginning of the game, and he also had a couple other long runs in this game where he was hitting holes hard. And when you have a performance like this against an SEC team in a big game, and a reason why your team is producing and able to be in a tight game like this, you're the reason why your team is scoring, you're going to get talked about a little bit. There's going to be some indications of like, hey, let's go back and check this guy out because maybe he's got something after a performance like this. Hopefully it's not just a flash in the pan and he ends up becoming like a CJ Verdell, who was a nobody after that one game that he had last year. But interesting to see the plays that he put on tape this past week.
How'd you say his name again? I know I'm going to butcher it.
Israel Abakinda. That was how the broadcaster said it.
I love it, man. I love it. So, I mean, he'll be an interesting player to watch because I think that Keaton Slovis got knocked out of that game, didn't he? I saw that Nick Patty, I think, is the backup quarterback.
Yeah.
He came in at the end. I don't know if he got knocked out or if it was just a play issue or something, but
I think he did I think there was an injury. Patty finished 9 for 20, by the way, which is just
it's so ugly, man. And they still almost won the game, didn't they? They almost won that football game. But
yeah,
Israel is running behind a very good offensive line. So he might be getting leaned on now. And you got guys like Carter Warren up front. I know Gabe Huey is still coming back from injury, but I like the right tackle a lot. Matt Gonclaves, Marcus Minor's a good offensive guard at the college level. So they're playing behind one of the more experienced offensive lines in Pitt, a good offensive line. And looks like they might have to work. They have to kind of rely on Israel Abakinda to move forward here because if Nick Patty's the starting quarterback for foreseeable future, you might have to run the ball a little bit. Probably not going to be great.
Yeah. Nick Patty, though, was very hard to watch.
It's such a bad quarterback name, too. Nick Patty.
I know.
Nick Patty. Awful name.
You're getting flipped every play. At Joe DeLeone at Rise and Draft. Thanks for tuning in. We'll be back with more. I think we'll have an interview dropping this week, so be sure to tune in for that. We'll be back, and we'll talk to you later.